I know you're in there. Open the door. This is not a request. You want to make this worse? Keep testing me. Unlock it. Now, last warning. You let me in or I come in my way. Decide quick.
This woman thought she was opening her door to help a police officer. Instead, she came face to face with a predator who'd been hunting victims for years. Before we continue, let me take this opportunity to thank you so much for supporting our channel. Just choosing to watch our video means a lot to us. Before we go any further, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below. And don't forget to like and subscribe if this is your first time here. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in April when Keisha Morgan heard the knock. She lived alone in a modest duplex on the east side of Riverside, working double shifts as a home health aide to make rent. She'd just gotten off a 12-hour day caring for an elderly dementia patient. Her scrubs were still on. Her feet ached. All she wanted was sleep. The knock came again, harder this time. Keisha checked her doorbell camera from her phone. A uniformed police officer stood on her porch, alone, no patrol car visible in the frame. He was white, somewhere in his 40s, with graying hair at the temples. His badge reflected the porch light. His hand rested near his belt. "Riverside PD," he called through the door. "I need to speak with you about a welfare check." Keisha's stomach dropped. Her mother lived 2 hours away in poor health. Her younger brother had been struggling. She opened the door but kept the chain lock engaged. "What's going on?" she asked. "Is my family okay?" The officer smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I need to come inside to discuss this, ma'am. It's protocol." "Can you tell me what this is about first?" His smile faded. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to open this door. This is official police business." Something felt wrong. Keisha had been stopped by police before. She knew how traffic stops worked, how they asked questions. This didn't feel like protocol. This felt like pressure. "Do you have a warrant?" she asked. The officer's jaw tightened. "I don't need a warrant for a welfare check. Open this door." Keisha held her phone. She started recording through the door camera app. "I'm not opening the door without knowing what this is about. If someone in my family is hurt, you can tell me right now." The officer stepped closer to the door. "Listen to me very carefully. You're making this difficult. I'm trying to help you, but if you don't comply, this becomes a problem." His tone had changed. The official voice was gone. Now he sounded angry, impatient. Keisha took a step back. "I'm calling the police department right now to confirm this welfare check." "I am the police department," he snapped. "Then you won't mind me calling dispatch." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The officer stared at the camera, then at the chain lock, then back at the camera. Keisha watched his face change as he seemed to realize something. He stepped back from the door. "You know what? False alarm. Wrong address. Have a good night." He turned and walked quickly down her porch steps, disappearing into the darkness beyond her camera's view. No car door slammed, no engine started. He just vanished into the night. Keisha's hands trembled as she locked the deadbolt. Something was deeply, terribly wrong. Real cops didn't just leave like that. Real welfare checks didn't involve threats and anger. She downloaded the footage from her doorbell camera and called 911. The real police department had no record of any welfare check at her address. No units had been dispatched to her street. When she described the officer, the dispatcher went quiet for a long moment. "Ma'am, can you send us that video footage immediately?" Keisha did. Within 20 minutes, 2 patrol cars arrived. But this time, she recognized the protocol. They identified themselves clearly. They explained why they were there. They asked permission before stepping inside. The detective who arrived an hour later looked at the footage on Keisha's phone with an expression she couldn't read. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful. "Miss Morgan, you did everything right tonight. Do you recognize this officer?" "No," said Keisha. "Should I?" The detective hesitated. "His name is Officer Brett Holloway. He's been with Riverside PD for 19 years, and based on what you've just shown us, you may not be his first victim." The detective's words hung in the air like a threat that hadn't fully materialized yet. Keisha sat at her kitchen table, watching him replay the doorbell footage for the third time. Each viewing made her feel sicker. "What do you mean I'm not his first victim?" she asked. "He didn't actually do anything. He just knocked on my door." Detective Sarah Vance looked up from the laptop. "He attempted to gain unlawful entry into your home by impersonating official business. He lied about a welfare check. He threatened you with arrest. And when he realized you were documenting the encounter, he fled." She paused. "Miss Morgan, officers don't behave that way unless they're hiding something." Vance explained that Holloway worked patrol in the Eastern District, the same area where Keisha lived. He often volunteered for night shifts. He had a clean record, commendations for community service, and a reputation as a dedicated officer. On paper, he was exemplary. But 3 months earlier, a complaint had been filed. A woman named Jasmine Torres claimed Holloway had shown up at her apartment at night, alone, insisting he needed to check on a domestic disturbance report. There had been no such report. When Torres refused entry, Holloway eventually left. She filed a complaint, but without evidence, it went nowhere. Internal Affairs had noted it and moved on. "We thought it was an isolated incident," Vance said. "Maybe a miscommunication. Maybe she misunderstood his intentions." She closed the laptop. "Your footage changes everything. It proves a pattern." Within 48 hours, the department launched a full investigation. Holloway's body camera footage from the past 2 years was pulled and reviewed. What they found was chilling in its calculation. Holloway had been deactivating his body camera during certain calls. The gaps were small, usually just minutes, easily explained away as technical malfunctions or accidental shutoffs. But when investigators cross-referenced those gaps with his call logs, a pattern emerged. 7 incidents over 18 months, all late-night responses, all single women living alone, all in low-income neighborhoods where residents might be less likely to question police authority or file complaints. The body camera would go dark, then reactivate 20 or 30 minutes later, with Holloway already back in his patrol car, logging the call as a routine welfare check or unfounded disturbance. But Keisha's doorbell camera had captured what his body camera deliberately missed: the lies, the intimidation, the predatory patience. Detective Vance brought Keisha to the station 2 days later. In a conference room, she met 3 other women. All of them lived within a 5-mile radius. All of them had encountered Officer Brett Holloway late at night. The first woman, Jasmine Torres, was a hotel housekeeper. Holloway had come to her door claiming her car was about to be towed for parking violations. She'd let him inside to discuss it. Once inside, he locked the door behind him and told her they needed to work something out. She managed to call a neighbor who knocked loudly, and Holloway left. The second woman, Nicole Chen, was a nursing student. Holloway told her there'd been a break-in reported at her address. She was half asleep and confused when she opened the door. He'd pushed his way inside before she fully understood what was happening. He touched her arm, moved closer, asked if she lived alone. She screamed, and a roommate came running. Holloway claimed he was just checking the premises and left. The third woman, Amber Williams, didn't want to give details. She just kept saying, he got inside, and I couldn't get him to leave." Her hands shook as she spoke. "Do you see the pattern? How he tested boundaries, measured resistance, and adapted his approach each time?" Detective Vance laid out the timeline. "We believe there are more victims, women who let him inside, women he assaulted, women who were too afraid to report a police officer or didn't think anyone would believe them." The department issued a public appeal with Holloway's photo. Within a week, 4 more women came forward. Their stories were worse, much worse. One woman, Gabriela Reyes, reported that Holloway had raped her 6 months earlier. He'd come to her door claiming to investigate a noise complaint. She'd been drinking and disoriented. He'd helped himself inside, assaulted her on her couch, and left. She reported it to a different department 3 weeks later, but without evidence and Holloway's spotless record, the case stalled.
Another victim, LaToya Brooks, had been assaulted twice by Holloway over a 4-month period. Both times he'd used his uniform and badge to gain entry. Both times he'd threatened her afterwards, reminding her that no one would believe her word over a decorated officer's. The evidence mounted. Holloway's work phone showed he'd been searching police databases for single women with no local family, no criminal records, and no history of complaints. He was hunting for perfect victims, vulnerable, isolated, and unlikely to be believed. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated Keisha Morgan. She'd trusted her instincts, documented everything, and refused to comply with illegal orders.
Her doorbell footage became the foundation of the case. It proved premeditation. It proved deception. It proved that when challenged and recorded, Holloway ran. Within 2 weeks, Officer Brett Holloway was arrested at the police station where he'd worked for 19 years. He was charged with sexual assault, attempted sexual assault, official misconduct, abuse of authority, and criminal trespass. The detective told Keisha later that Holloway had seemed genuinely shocked when they put the handcuffs on, as if he'd believed his badge made him untouchable. The investigation into Brett Holloway's crimes expanded beyond what anyone had anticipated. What started as a handful of complaints became a sprawling case involving multiple jurisdictions, dozens of witnesses, and a trail of devastation stretching back years. Detective Vance assembled a task force dedicated solely to building the case. They combed through Holloway's entire career with Riverside PD. His personnel file painted the picture of a model officer. Awards for community policing, letters of commendation from grateful citizens, even a heroism citation from 5 years earlier when he'd pulled a child from a burning vehicle. But beneath that polished surface, cracks had always existed. The task force found them once they knew where to look. In 2019, a dispatcher had flagged unusual behavior. Holloway had been running license plates and address searches for women during his shifts, far more than any legitimate police work required. When questioned, he claimed he was being thorough in his community policing efforts. The inquiry went no further. In 2021, a fellow officer had mentioned to a supervisor that Holloway seemed to volunteer for calls involving single women more than other officers. The supervisor had brushed it off as coincidence. No formal report was filed. The system had failed to connect the dots, or perhaps it had chosen not to look too closely at one of its own. Forensic analysts examined Holloway's personal devices after obtaining a warrant. What they discovered made the scope of his predation clear. He'd been taking screenshots of women's addresses from the police database. He'd been photographing their driver's license photos from his patrol car computer. He had folders organized by neighborhood, filled with information on potential targets. One folder contained Keisha Morgan's information, her address, her work schedule, which he'd somehow obtained, even a note about her living alone. The date on the folder was 2 weeks before he'd appeared at her door. She hadn't been a random target. She'd been selected, researched, and stalked. The task force identified a total of 11 victims willing to testify. Their ages ranged from 22 to 34. 8 were women of color. 9 were working class, living paycheck to paycheck. All of them lived alone in apartments or small houses in Holloway's patrol zone. The assaults followed a disturbingly consistent pattern: late-night visits, fabricated emergencies or official business, gaining entry through deception or intimidation, then escalation. For some, like Keisha, he'd been deterred before the assault could occur. For others, he'd succeeded in his attack before leaving them traumatized and convinced no one would believe them over a police officer. The most disturbing revelation came from Holloway's ex-wife during her interview with investigators. They'd divorced 7 years earlier, and she'd left the state shortly after. When detectives tracked her down in Arizona, she was initially reluctant to speak. Then she broke down.
"I tried to tell people," she said. "I told his sergeant that Brett had problems with control and women, that he'd hurt me during our marriage, that I was afraid of what he might do with the power his badge gave him." She wiped her eyes. "They told me it was a domestic issue and suggested marriage counseling. No one investigated. No one cared." Her statement was heartbreaking. The department had been warned a decade earlier that Holloway posed a danger. The warning had been ignored. Public pressure mounted as news of the case spread. How had a predator operated openly for so many years? How many complaints had been dismissed or downplayed? How many victims had been disbelieved because challenging a police officer seemed impossible? Community activists demanded accountability not just for Holloway, but for the system that enabled him. Town halls were held. Survivors spoke publicly about their experiences with reporting sexual assault by law enforcement. The stories were gut-wrenching. One advocate pointed out the obvious. Women are taught to trust police officers, to comply with their authority, to open doors when they knock. Brett Holloway weaponized that trust, and when his victims tried to report him, the same system that gave him power protected him. The evidence against Holloway was now overwhelming. 11 victim testimonies, Keisha's doorbell footage showing his deception and intent, his own database searches proving premeditation, DNA evidence from rape kits that had been sitting in storage for months, never properly investigated until now. The district attorney, Maria Gonzalez, held a press conference. Her message was blunt. Brett Holloway used his position as a police officer to identify, stalk, and sexually assault vulnerable women in our community. He is not a cop who made mistakes. He is a serial predator who hid behind a badge.
She announced that Holloway faced 23 felony counts, 6 counts of rape, 4 counts of attempted rape, 7 counts of sexual assault, multiple counts of official misconduct, abuse of authority, and criminal trespass. If convicted on all counts, he faced life in prison. Holloway's defense attorney tried to poke holes in the prosecution's case. He argued the encounters were consensual. He claimed the women were lying or misremembering. He suggested they were motivated by potential civil lawsuits. But he couldn't explain the doorbell footage. He couldn't explain the database searches. He couldn't explain why his client had systematically targeted vulnerable women or why he'd fled when confronted with evidence. What would you have done if you were on that jury? Could you hear those stories and see that evidence and reach any other conclusion? The trial was set for October. Until then, Holloway sat in county jail, denied bail due to the severity of charges and flight risk. His mugshot showed a man who looked nothing like the confident officer in his commendation photos. He looked small, defeated, exposed. Keisha Morgan tried to return to normal life, but normal felt impossible now. She'd moved to a new apartment with better security. She'd installed multiple cameras. She'd struggled to sleep. Every knock on the door sent her heart racing. But she also felt something else, purpose. Her decision to record that night, to trust her instincts, to refuse compliance, had saved her, and it had given 11 other women the evidence they needed to finally be believed. The sentencing hearing took place 3 weeks after the verdict. The courtroom was full again, but this time the atmosphere felt different. The uncertainty was gone. Now there was only the weight of consequence. Judge Patricia Hammond reviewed the pre-sentence report in silence. Holloway stood before her in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed at his waist. His attorney had submitted a plea for leniency, citing Holloway's years of service, his lack of prior criminal record, and his potential for rehabilitation. The victims had submitted impact statements. Some attended in person to read them aloud. Gabriela Reyes spoke first. "Brett Holloway didn't just rape me. He stole my sense of safety. He made me afraid to open my door, afraid to call the police when I needed help, afraid to trust anyone in authority. He knew I wouldn't be believed because he wore a badge, and he was right. Until Keisha Morgan's video gave us proof, we were all just liars accusing a hero cop." LaToya Brooks described the nightmares that still woke her, The therapy sessions, the relationships she couldn't maintain because intimacy now triggered panic attacks. He didn't attack me once and disappear. He came back because my silence told him he could. Every woman he hurt after me is partially my responsibility, and I have to live with that. Keisha stood at the podium with a written statement, but she spoke from memory instead. I don't consider myself a victim because he never got the chance to hurt me the way he hurt these other women. But I know what could have happened if I'd opened that door, if I hadn't recorded, if I hadn't trusted that feeling in my gut that something was wrong. She looked directly at Holloway for the first time. You picked me because you thought I was vulnerable, young, black, living alone, working long hours. You thought I'd be too tired or too scared to resist. You were wrong. And when I stood up to you, when I demanded accountability, you ran like the coward you are. Holloway's attorney asked permission for his client to address the court. Judge Hammond allowed it. Holloway stood and turned toward the gallery. His voice was quiet, almost rehearsed. I want to apologize to anyone I've hurt through my actions. I made mistakes in judgment. I crossed professional boundaries. I accept responsibility for my behavior. It was a carefully worded non-apology. He never admitted to rape, never acknowledged the predatory pattern, never named his victims, or spoke to the years of terror he'd inflicted. Gabriella shouted from the gallery, "You're a rapist! Say it! Admit what you did!" The judge gavelled for order. Holloway sat back down, his expression unchanged. Judge Hammond addressed the court. Brett Holloway was entrusted with enormous power as a police officer. He swore an oath to protect the public. Instead, he systematically identified vulnerable women, exploited his position of authority, and committed acts of sexual violence against those he was sworn to serve. She reviewed the convictions. 6 counts of rape, 4 counts of attempted rape, 7 counts of sexual assault, multiple counts of official misconduct, abuse of authority, and criminal trespass. The evidence in this case reveals a man who spent years perfecting his predatory behavior, who used law enforcement databases as a hunting ground, who relied on the institutional protection afforded to police officers to avoid accountability. The harm you've caused is immeasurable. The trust you've betrayed is irreparable. Judge Hammond sentenced Holloway to 27 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole before serving 85% of his sentence. He would be 69 years old before he could even apply for release. The sentence was the maximum allowed under state law for the combined convictions. Holloway would also be required to register as a sex offender for life upon release. As bailiffs led him away, Holloway glanced back at the gallery one final time. His face showed no remorse, no recognition of the destruction he'd caused, just anger at being caught. Outside the courthouse, Keisha spoke to reporters. She kept it brief. "I hope this case shows other women that your instincts matter. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Document everything. Ask questions. Demand accountability. Don't let a uniform or a badge intimidate you into silence." Detective Vance stood beside her. Keisha Morgan's courage broke this case open. Her video gave us the evidence we needed. But we also have to acknowledge that the system failed for years before that. Multiple complaints were dismissed. Multiple victims weren't believed. We have to do better. The Riverside Police Department announced immediate reforms: mandatory body camera activation during all public interactions, independent review of all complaints against officers, a victims advocacy unit specifically for cases involving law enforcement misconduct, community oversight of internal investigations. Whether those reforms would be implemented effectively remained to be seen. Institutional change comes slowly, if it comes at all. For the victims, the verdict brought a measure of justice, but not erasure of trauma. Therapy would continue. Nightmares would persist. Trust would remain fractured. Healing takes time, and some wounds never fully close. But they had been heard.
They had been believed, and the man who hurt them would spend decades behind bars, powerless to hurt anyone else. Keisha returned to her job as a caregiver. She still worked long hours, still struggled to make rent, still lived alone, but she'd moved to a new apartment in a different neighborhood, one with better lighting and more security cameras than she probably needed. She thought about that night often, how close she'd come to opening the door fully, how different her life would be now if she had. She thought about the other women who'd survived Holloway, the ones who'd shown incredible courage in coming forward despite the odds stacked against them. And she thought about the women they'd never know about, the ones who stayed silent because they knew reporting would mean facing a system designed to doubt them. The case had exposed uncomfortable truths about power, authority, and who gets believed when accusations are made. It raised questions that extended far beyond one predator in one police department. Do you think justice was truly served with 27 years, or should the system that enabled him for so long face consequences too? Before you go, let us know what you think in the comments. Would you have done what Keisha did, or would fear have made you comply? And if you found this story important, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. These are the stories that need to be told, and your support helps us keep telling them. Sometimes, standing your ground against authority takes more courage than anyone should have to summon. But sometimes, it's the only thing standing between you and becoming another statistic. Keisha Morgan refused to be a statistic. She trusted herself when the situation demanded it, and because of that, 11 women finally got justice.